I used to believe that betrayal was the deepest wound a heart could carry, until I watched an entire ballroom applaud it. The Royal Moon Ball was the most anticipated celebration of the year, where every noble family gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers to honor the unity of the Northern Territories before the Alpha King arrived. Music drifted gracefully through the magnificent hall as polished marble floors reflected thousands of warm candlelights, elegant gowns shimmered like flowing rivers beneath silver decorations, and conversations filled the palace with carefully measured laughter. Abigail Hayes stood alone near one of the towering marble columns, her midnight blue gown simple compared to the extravagant dresses surrounding her, yet she wore it with quiet dignity. She had almost refused the invitation when it arrived several weeks earlier. After everything that had happened, returning to the place where so many remembered her only as Ethan Brooke's former mate seemed like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Yet hiding from painful memories would never erase them. She had promised herself that fear would never decide where she belonged. Taking a slow breath, she lifted her chin and quietly admired the elegant ballroom instead of the curious glances directed toward her. A soft melody echoed from the royal orchestra while servants carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks through groups of influential nobles discussing business, alliances, and ancient family traditions. Abigail smiled politely whenever someone looked her way, even though many quickly turned aside after recognizing her. Then the enormous palace doors opened once more. Every nearby conversation slowed. Ethan Brooks entered with the confidence of a man certain everyone wanted to see him. Beside him walked Sophia Bennet, radiant in an expensive emerald green gown decorated with delicate gemstones that glittered beneath the chandeliers. Ethan gently offered his arm while Sophia accepted it with an elegant smile, and together they crossed the ballroom as though the evening belonged entirely to them. Abigail felt her heartbeat stumble for only a moment before she quietly reminded herself that some chapters were meant to stay closed. She had loved Ethan once with complete sincerity. That truth no longer embarrassed her. What hurt was remembering how easily genuine loyalty had been exchanged for wealth, influence, and noble ambition. Ethan's eyes soon found her across the ballroom. A faint smile appeared on his face, though it carried neither warmth nor regret. Instead of avoiding her, he deliberately guided Sophia toward the exact place where Abigail stood. Several nearby guests immediately sensed the uncomfortable history between them and gradually fell silent, curiosity replacing conversation. Abigail, Ethan greeted smoothly, as though they had simply met after years apart. "I was not sure you would actually come tonight." Before Abigail could answer, Sophia looked her up and down with a pleasant smile that somehow felt colder than open hostility. "We are so glad you accepted the invitation," she said sweetly. "It would have been unfortunate if old misunderstandings had kept you away from such an important evening." Abigail met her gaze without anger. "Congratulations to both of you," she answered calmly. "I hope tonight brings you everything you are hoping for." Ethan laughed quietly, slipping an affectionate glance toward Sophia. "It already has." Several nobles exchanged knowing smiles while whispered conversations quietly spread through the surrounding crowd. Abigail heard fragments carried beneath the music. Poor Omega. She never stood a chance. He chose wisely. Some people simply do not belong beside rising nobility. Every word landed like winter snow, cold yet strangely familiar. Abigail refused to let any expression reveal the ache beneath her composed smile. She had survived far worse than whispers. As Ethan and Sophia continued greeting influential guests, the orchestra suddenly softened and the royal herald stepped into the center of the ballroom, raising his ceremonial staff. The entire hall gradually fell silent as the herald announced that an honored guest had unexpectedly arrived before the Alpha King's scheduled entrance, and although few recognized the distinguished elderly gentleman quietly entering through the palace doors, Abigail noticed something in his unsteady steps that no one else seemed willing to see. Abigail's attention lingered on the distinguished elderly gentleman as he paused near the entrance, accepting polite greetings with a gracious smile that somehow failed to hide the exhaustion behind his thoughtful gray eyes. Around him, nobles returned to their conversations almost immediately, assuming he was simply another respected guest invited to the royal ball. Abigail noticed something different. His shoulders seemed unusually tense, and every measured step carried a quiet effort that did not belong in someone merely enjoying the evening. Before she could move closer, a familiar voice pulled her backward into memories she had spent months trying to leave behind. There had been a time when Ethan Brooks had stood in a far smaller ballroom wearing an inexpensive formal jacket with hopeful dreams and uncertain confidence. Back then, he possessed little more than determination and an ambitious heart. Abigail never cared about titles or fortunes. She admired the kindness she believed she saw within him. While Ethan struggled to earn recognition among influential families, Abigail became the quiet foundation beneath every success. She spent long evenings helping him organize proposals before important council meetings, introduced him to respected community leaders who trusted her character, volunteered beside him during charity events that slowly built his reputation, and encouraged him whenever disappointment tempted him to surrender. Every achievement Ethan celebrated had been reached with Abigail standing faithfully beside him, asking for nothing except honesty in return. Then invitations from the powerful Bennett family began arriving. Ethan assured Abigail they represented only professional opportunities that could strengthen his future. She believed him because trust had always been easier than suspicion. Gradually, conversations became shorter. Shared dinners became cancelled appointments. Warm smiles became distracted glances toward opportunities that seemed more attractive than promises. Friends who once welcomed Abigail with genuine affection suddenly struggled to meet her eyes. Whispered conversations stopped whenever she entered a room. The truth finally arrived on a rainy afternoon outside her small stone cottage. Ethan stood beneath the porch roof holding an umbrella while carefully choosing words that sounded reasonable enough to excuse betrayal. He explained that life required practical decisions. Sophia Bennett belonged to one of the wealthiest noble families in the Northern Territories. A future beside her offered influence, stability, and doors that love alone could never open. Abigail listened quietly without interrupting him. She searched his face, hoping to recognize the young man she had once believed would rather lose everything than abandon the person who believed in him before anyone else did. She could not find him. When Ethan finished speaking, Abigail removed the simple silver pendant he had once placed around her neck beneath the moonlit oak tree where he promised they would always choose each other over ambition. She carefully placed the pendant into his hand and offered a gentle smile touched by sadness rather than anger. "Then I hope you find everything you believe you are searching for," she whispered before quietly closing the cottage door. She never begged him to stay. She never demanded an explanation beyond the one he had already chosen. The tears came only after his footsteps disappeared into the rain. Even then, Abigail refused to let bitterness become part of who she was. She continued volunteering throughout the village, delivering warm meals to elderly neighbors, reading stories to children each weekend, and helping anyone who needed an extra pair of hands because kindness had never depended upon who appreciated it. Standing once again inside the magnificent royal ballroom, she realized those painful memories no longer carried the power they once had. Ethan had taken away a future she imagined, but he had never taken away the person she remained. As she quietly looked toward the elderly gentleman near the palace entrance, she noticed his breathing suddenly become uneven. His silver cane slipped slightly against the polished marble floor while dozens of nearby guests watched with uncertain expressions, waiting for someone else to become the first person willing to step forward. The silver cane slipped from the elderly gentleman's hand and rolled across the polished marble floor with a sharp echo that silenced the nearest conversations. He reached instinctively for the carved stone railing beside him, but his balance faltered before his fingers could find support. Around him, elegantly dressed nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked toward palace attendants. Others searched the ballroom for the royal physician. No one wanted to interrupt the prestigious celebration by reacting too quickly. Abigail did not stop to think. She gathered the edge of her midnight blue gown and crossed the marble floor without hesitation, kneeling beside the elderly gentleman before anyone else had taken a single step. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently, her voice calm enough to soften the growing tension around them. The gentleman slowly nodded, though his breathing remained uneven. Abigail offered him a reassuring smile instead of alarm. Please remain seated for a moment. Slow breaths. You are safe. She carefully helped him lean comfortably against the wide marble staircase without forcing unnecessary movement. Turning toward a nearby palace servant, she spoke with quiet confidence. Would you please bring cool water and kindly ask the royal physician to come? There is no need to frighten anyone. Simply let him know someone may need assistance. The servant immediately hurried away. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed the gathering crowd and quietly shook his head. She always finds a way to become the center of attention, he remarked under his breath. Sophia followed his gaze before offering a graceful smile that failed to reach her eyes. Perhaps she believes kindness is easier to notice than success, she replied softly, making certain several nearby nobles could hear her. A gentleman standing beside them chuckled politely. Some people mistake ordinary courtesy for extraordinary virtue. Another noblewoman nodded. She certainly chose the perfect moment. Gentle laughter spread through the surrounding group. Abigail heard every whispered remark. She answered none of them. Her attention never left the elderly gentleman. When the servant returned with a crystal glass of cool water, Abigail carefully helped the gentleman take a slow sip before encouraging him to continue breathing comfortably. Within another minute, the tension gradually disappeared from his face. His complexion regained healthy color, and the strain around his eyes slowly faded. The royal physician arrived moments later, examined the gentleman carefully, then looked toward Abigail with quiet approval. You handled the situation with remarkable composure, he said. Remaining calm often helps more than people realize. Abigail simply smiled. I am relieved he is feeling better. The elderly gentleman looked directly into her eyes, gratitude shining behind the wisdom written across his weathered face. My dear, he said warmly, you never asked who I was before deciding whether I deserved your help. Abigail lowered her gaze modestly. I did not need to know, she answered. Someone needed kindness. That was enough. The gentleman remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before gently placing one hand over hers. The kingdom is fortunate that people like you still exist. Slowly rising with assistance from the physician, he adjusted the sleeve of his formal coat. For only an instant, an ancient silver emblem embroidered near the cuff became visible beneath the ballroom lights before disappearing once again beneath the fabric. Almost no one noticed it. Almost. A royal guard stationed near the staircase immediately recognized the unmistakable symbol, his expression changing from routine professionalism to quiet surprise. Without drawing attention to himself, he respectfully bowed toward the elderly gentleman before slipping through a private palace doorway, carrying news that would soon transform the entire royal ball in a way none of the gathered nobles could possibly imagine. As the royal physician escorted the distinguished gentleman toward a quieter corner of the grand royal ballroom, the orchestra gently resumed its elegant melody, and conversation slowly returned as though the interruption had been nothing more than a brief pause in an otherwise perfect celebration. Yet something invisible had changed. Curious eyes continued following Abigail wherever she walked. Some admired her composure, while others searched for reasons to diminish what they had just witnessed. Ethan accepted a crystal glass from a passing servant and smiled with effortless confidence. She has always known how to attract sympathy, he remarked quietly. Sophia laughed softly before replying, some people mistake being noticed for being respected. A nearby nobleman nodded with polite amusement. Helping an elderly guest was kind, but hardly extraordinary. Another noblewoman gently lifted her fan and whispered, the attention will disappear soon enough. Their quiet remarks spread through nearby circles until they became accepted truth among those eager to protect their own pride. Abigail heard enough to understand every implication, yet she offered no defense. She calmly thanked the servant who offered her a fresh glass of sparkling water before walking toward the towering palace windows overlooking the moonlit royal gardens. Beyond the glass, silver light rested across elegant fountains, ancient oak trees, and perfectly trimmed hedges swaying beneath a cool evening breeze. The peaceful view reminded her that nature never measured worth by titles or wealth. It simply revealed what already existed inside every heart. Behind her, Sophia deliberately raised her voice just enough to be overheard. "Ryan, I mean Ethan, I suppose some people simply cannot accept that life moves forward." Ethan answered with composed certainty. "Everyone eventually finds where they belong." Abigail quietly closed her eyes for only a moment. Months earlier, hearing those words would have broken her heart all over again. Tonight they felt strangely empty, as though the memories attached to them had finally begun to fade. Across the ballroom, the distinguished elderly gentleman observed everything with thoughtful gray eyes. His strength had fully returned, but he made no effort to reveal who he truly was. Instead, he quietly approached the captain of the royal guard waiting near one of the marble columns. Leaning slightly closer, he spoke only a few calm sentences before placing one reassuring hand upon the officer's shoulder. The captain's respectful expression immediately became more serious. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply and disappeared through a private corridor reserved exclusively for members of the royal household. Within minutes, subtle changes unfolded throughout the palace. Additional royal guards silently took ceremonial positions along the crimson carpet. Palace attendants carefully adjusted silver wolf banners hanging between the towering marble columns. Musicians exchanged meaningful glances before replacing the ballroom waltz with sheet music reserved only for the arrival of the sovereign. Experienced nobles noticed every detail. Conversations gradually disappeared. Guests straightened elegant gowns, polished ceremonial medals, and tailored formal jackets while instinctively arranging themselves into respectful lines facing the grand entrance. Ethan felt renewed confidence rising inside him. Surely tonight would become the beginning of an even greater future. Sophia gently adjusted the sparkling emerald necklace resting against her gown, convinced that standing beside Ethan would finally attract the recognition she believed they deserved. Neither of them noticed the quiet smile crossing the elderly gentleman's face as he looked once more toward Abigail standing peacefully beside the moonlit window. He already knew that before another melody could begin, the Alpha King would enter the grand royal ballroom, and every assumption made throughout the evening would be quietly overturned by a single decision that no one present would ever forget. The final notes of the ceremonial anthem faded into complete silence as the towering palace doors slowly opened, revealing two perfectly aligned rows of royal guards dressed in midnight black ceremonial uniforms trimmed with polished silver. Every noble instinctively straightened their posture. Conversations disappeared. Even the crystal chandeliers seemed to shimmer more softly beneath the weight of expectation filling the magnificent ballroom. Ethan quietly adjusted the collar of his tailored formal coat before offering Sophia a confident smile. "This is the opportunity we have been waiting for," he whispered. "Stay close to me." Sophia gracefully lifted her chin, every movement refined through years of noble etiquette. She had imagined this evening countless times. Stories of King Adrian Blackwood had spread across every noble household in the Northern Territories. Some admired his wisdom. Others respected his unwavering devotion to justice. Every ambitious family understood that earning even a moment of recognition from the Alpha King could elevate an entire bloodline. Around them, influential merchants, military commanders, governors, council members, and heirs to ancient noble houses carefully adjusted jeweled gowns, embroidered jackets, polished medals, and ceremonial rings while quietly hoping to attract the king's attention. Abigail remained peacefully beside the towering palace window overlooking the moonlit gardens beyond the marble terrace. She made no attempt to step closer to the crimson carpet stretching toward the entrance. Recognition had never been the reason she accepted the invitation. She gently placed her untouched glass of sparkling water onto a passing servant's silver tray before folding her hands together, content simply to witness the evening unfold. Near the entrance, the distinguished elderly gentleman stood calmly beside the captain of the royal guard. His breathing had fully recovered, yet his thoughtful gray eyes remained fixed upon Abigail across the ballroom. Leaning toward the captain, he quietly spoke one final sentence before stepping respectfully aside. The captain immediately bowed deeply and resumed his ceremonial position. Although no guest overheard their exchange, the elderly gentleman's peaceful expression suggested complete certainty about what would happen next. Ethan glanced once more toward Abigail and saw another opportunity to remind both her and the surrounding nobles that his future belonged elsewhere. Guiding Sophia gracefully across the polished marble floor, he deliberately paused within easy hearing distance. "I sincerely hope life has been treating you well," he said politely. "Sometimes people simply discover they were meant to walk different paths." Sophia smiled with quiet satisfaction before adding, "The future has a way of rewarding the right choices." Several nearby nobles nodded approvingly, believing they were witnessing the graceful conclusion of a forgotten romance. Abigail looked at both of them without resentment. "Then I truly hope your future brings you peace," she answered softly. Her calm sincerity unsettled Ethan far more than anger ever could. Before anyone could speak again, the royal herald stepped forward and struck the polished marble floor once with his ceremonial staff. The clear echo rolled through every corner of the grand royal ballroom. Instantly every guest lowered their head in respectful silence. His Majesty, King Adrian Blackwood, Sovereign of the Northern Territories, Guardian of the Moon Throne, Alpha King of the United Pax. The towering palace doors opened completely as cool evening air drifted into the hall carrying the scent of pine forests beyond the palace walls. Slow measured footsteps echoed across the marble floor with quiet authority. No one dared lift their eyes before royal protocol permitted it. Every heartbeat inside the ballroom seemed to pause together. Only the distinguished elderly gentleman allowed himself the faintest knowing smile, already aware that the Alpha King would walk past every celebrated noble gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers and toward the one quiet Omega whose compassion had already earned the highest respect in the kingdom. King Adrian Blackwood entered the grand royal ballroom with the quiet confidence of a ruler who had never needed admiration to confirm his authority. His tailored black royal coat, embroidered with elegant silver thread along the collar and cuffs, reflected the warm candlelight as each measured step echoed across the polished marble floor. Behind him followed only 2 royal guards, yet the atmosphere carried the unmistakable presence of an entire kingdom. Every noble remained respectfully still. Every hopeful smile settled into disciplined composure. Adrian's calm silver-gray eyes slowly moved across the gathered guests, observing every carefully arranged expression without revealing a single thought. Near the entrance, the distinguished elderly gentleman met the Alpha King's gaze and offered the slightest respectful nod. It lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet it conveyed everything that needed to be said. Adrian continued forward with complete certainty. Ethan felt excitement rise inside him. This was the opportunity he had imagined ever since receiving his invitation to the royal ball. As the Alpha King approached, Ethan stepped forward half a pace and lowered his head with flawless etiquette while Sophia completed a graceful curtsy perfected through years of noble education. Several nearby families smiled confidently, convinced the king's attention would naturally fall upon one of the kingdom's most promising young noble couples. Instead, Adrian walked directly past them without slowing his pace. Ethan's confident smile froze. Sophia's expression briefly flickered with confusion before she convinced herself that the king simply intended to greet someone more important first. Yet Adrian continued walking without hesitation. He passed decorated military commanders wearing rows of distinguished honors. He passed wealthy merchants whose fortunes supported royal projects. He passed governors, council members, and heirs of ancient noble bloodlines. None received more than a calm glance. Quiet uncertainty spread throughout the ballroom. Guests cautiously lifted their eyes, wondering who could possibly command the personal attention of the Alpha King. Adrian's steady gaze finally rested upon one figure standing peacefully beside the moonlit palace window. Abigail looked up only after realizing the footsteps had stopped directly before her. Believing she might be blocking his path, she instinctively stepped aside. Adrian remained exactly where he was. The magnificent ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Abigail respectfully lowered her head. "Your Majesty," she said softly. Adrian regarded her with composed warmth, seeing not the Omega others had underestimated but the woman whose compassion had revealed itself without expectation of recognition. He saw the woman who had offered comfort before asking questions, dignity while enduring humiliation, and kindness even when surrounded by judgment. Slowly, with deliberate care, Adrian reached inside his royal coat and withdrew an ancient silver crest engraved with the sacred emblem of the Moon Throne. Every experienced noble recognized it immediately. The royal crest of honor had rarely been bestowed by the Alpha King himself. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Adrian lowered himself onto one knee before Abigail Hayes. Shock swept across the ballroom like a silent wave. Crystal glasses trembled in uncertain hands. Every whispered conversation vanished. Ethan stared without blinking as the certainty he had carried all evening disappeared in a single impossible moment. Sophia instinctively stepped backward, unable to believe the ordinary Omega she had quietly mocked now stood before the kneeling ruler of the Northern Territories. No guest present had ever witnessed the Alpha King kneel before anyone during a royal ball. Holding the ancient silver crest respectfully with both hands, Adrian looked up at Abigail with quiet admiration, his calm voice carrying effortlessly through the silent hall. "Miss Abigail Hayes," he said, "on behalf of the Northern Territories, I kneel today not because of your title, but because true honor deserves to be recognized wherever it is found, and tonight your compassion has reminded this kingdom what genuine greatness truly looks like." For several endless seconds, no one inside the grand royal ballroom dared to move. The only sound came from the gentle crackling of candlelight dancing beneath the crystal chandeliers while hundreds of astonished eyes remained fixed upon the impossible sight before them. Abigail stood motionless, her heart beating so quickly she wondered if everyone around her could hear it. The ancient silver crest rested in the Alpha King's hands, yet she could not believe it was truly meant for her. She searched Adrian's calm expression, convinced there had to be some misunderstanding. "Your Majesty," she whispered with quiet humility, "I believe you may have mistaken me for someone else." Adrian slowly rose to his feet, his composed expression softened by genuine respect rather than royal ceremony. "No, Miss Hayes," he answered calmly. "The only mistake made this evening was allowing your character to remain unnoticed for so long." With deliberate care, he placed the beautifully crafted silver crest into Abigail's trembling hands. As the polished emblem reflected the warm palace lights, a wave of disbelief swept across the ballroom. Every noble immediately recognized the ancient symbol. The royal crest of honor represented the kingdom's highest recognition for extraordinary compassion and selfless service. Many distinguished citizens had dreamed of receiving it, yet only a select few throughout modern history had ever been presented with the honor directly by the Alpha King himself. Ethan stared at the crest as though the world beneath him had quietly disappeared. Sophia instinctively stepped backward, unable to understand how the Omega she had dismissed only minutes earlier now stood at the center of the kingdom's greatest honor. At that moment, the distinguished elderly gentleman calmly stepped forward, resting both hands upon his polished silver cane before addressing the silent gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his steady voice carrying naturally across the magnificent hall, "allow me to introduce myself properly." Every guest immediately turned toward him. "I serve this kingdom as Royal Chancellor Benjamin Whitmore." Quiet gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Faces that had moments earlier regarded him as an ordinary elderly guest now reflected complete astonishment. The Chancellor respectfully inclined his head toward King Adrian before continuing. "A short time ago, I unexpectedly became unsteady near the palace entrance. Many honorable guests witnessed the moment. Many waited for someone else to respond. Only one person crossed the ballroom without hesitation. He slowly turned toward Abigail. She never asked my name. She never questioned my rank. She never considered whether helping me would benefit her reputation. She simply saw another human being who needed kindness." Complete silence settled over the ballroom once again. The Chancellor's thoughtful eyes swept across the gathered nobles. Compassion offered without expectation is the rarest form of nobility. Adrian nodded once before addressing the assembly with calm authority. "Tonight I have witnessed remarkable wealth, influential families, and impressive titles. Yet none of those qualities have inspired me as deeply as quiet integrity freely given without seeking recognition. His silver-gray eyes slowly moved across the ballroom before briefly resting upon Ethan and Sophia. Neither possessed the courage to meet his gaze. True greatness, Adrian continued, is never measured by status, privilege, or applause. It reveals itself through the choices we make when kindness asks something of us and no reward is waiting in return. His words settled over the hall with undeniable weight. The noble woman who had whispered cruel remarks lowered her eyes in silent embarrassment. The gentleman who had dismissed Abigail's actions quietly stepped aside, unable to ignore the shame growing across his face. Ethan felt painful memories return one after another, remembering every sacrifice Abigail had made while helping him pursue the future he eventually chose to share with someone else. Standing only a few yards away from the woman he had abandoned, he finally understood that the greatest treasure he had ever possessed had never been influence or ambition. It had always been the extraordinary heart now standing beside the Alpha King, holding the admiration of an entire kingdom without ever asking anyone to notice. The grand royal ballroom remained wrapped in thoughtful silence long after the Alpha King's words settled into every heart present. No one hurried to speak because everyone understood they had witnessed something far greater than a royal ceremony. They had watched true character rise above wealth, titles, and appearances. King Adrian gently stepped back, allowing Abigail a quiet moment to absorb what had just happened. She looked down at the ancient silver crest resting in her hands, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. Never once in her life had she imagined standing before the entire kingdom receiving its highest honor. Not because she believed herself unworthy, but because she had never performed kindness expecting anyone to notice. The royal chancellor smiled warmly before addressing the gathered nobles one final time. "There is another lesson hidden within tonight," he said calmly. "Many people spend years searching for influence while overlooking the simple opportunities to become honorable. The kingdom grows stronger whenever compassion becomes more valuable than ambition." His quiet words lingered throughout the magnificent hall. Several respected council members slowly lowered their heads, recognizing how easily genuine goodness had gone unnoticed while impressive family names received endless admiration. Ethan remained frozen where he stood. Every memory returned with painful clarity. He remembered Abigail staying awake beside him through endless evenings while he prepared speeches for noble councils. He remembered her introducing him to respected community leaders who trusted her integrity before they ever trusted his potential. He remembered every encouraging smile she offered after difficult failures, every sacrifice she quietly accepted without complaint, every dream she celebrated as though it belonged equally to both of them. He had mistaken quiet loyalty for something that would always remain waiting. Looking at Abigail now, he finally understood that the greatest mistake of his life had never been choosing another path. It had been failing to recognize the extraordinary woman already walking beside him. Sophia slowly released the confident posture she had carried throughout the evening. For the first time, she no longer searched the ballroom for approving glances. They no longer mattered. Standing beneath the towering chandeliers, surrounded by the kingdom's highest nobility, she realized admiration built upon appearance disappeared in an instant, while respect earned through character only became stronger with time. King Adrian looked toward Abigail with sincere warmth. "Miss Hayes," he said gently, "the royal crest recognizes one evening, but your reputation has been quietly built over many years. The reports presented before the Royal Council spoke of your volunteer work. Your generosity toward strangers, your support for struggling families, and your willingness to help others without expecting recognition. Tonight simply allowed the entire kingdom to see what many ordinary people already knew." Abigail lifted her eyes, her voice remaining soft and humble. "Your Majesty, I only tried to treat people the way I hoped they would be treated if our places had been exchanged." Adrian smiled with quiet admiration. "That answer is precisely why this honor belongs in your hands." Around them, the atmosphere transformed completely. The same nobles who had whispered judgment only an hour earlier now stepped respectfully aside whenever Abigail moved through the ballroom. Several offered sincere bows. Others quietly apologized with nothing more than grateful expressions, understanding that some mistakes required humility rather than explanation. Abigail accepted every gesture without resentment because forgiveness had always rested more naturally within her heart than bitterness ever could. As moonlight continued pouring through the towering palace windows, illuminating silver wolf banners hanging proudly above the marble floor, the royal ballroom no longer celebrated noble status alone. It celebrated the quiet truth that genuine greatness often walks unnoticed until kindness reveals it to the world. The quiet silence that filled the grand royal ballroom slowly gave way to the gentle opening notes of a graceful royal waltz as King Adrian Blackwood extended his hand toward Abigail with calm confidence. His expression remained warm yet dignified, carrying none of the distance so often associated with powerful rulers. "Miss Hayes," he said, his steady voice reaching every corner of the magnificent hall, "would you honor this kingdom by sharing the first dance of the evening with me?" Abigail looked at him in complete surprise. Only a short while earlier she had stood alone beside a marble column believing she would quietly leave the palace remembered only as the Omega whose former mate had chosen someone else. Now the Alpha King himself stood before her with genuine respect reflected in his silver-gray eyes. She carefully drew a slow breath, steadied the ancient royal crest resting in her hands, and gently placed her hand into his. "I would be honored, Your Majesty," she answered softly. A faint smile appeared across Adrian's face before he guided her toward the center of the polished marble floor. The royal orchestra allowed the elegant melody to rise naturally beneath the crystal chandeliers, filling the ballroom with peaceful warmth rather than overwhelming celebration. Their dance was graceful, respectful, and unhurried, built upon admiration instead of spectacle. As they moved together beneath the shimmering lights, the assembled nobles quietly stepped aside, forming a wide circle around them. One after another, distinguished guests lowered their heads with sincere respect. Earlier that same evening those familiar faces had offered whispered judgment, polite laughter, and quiet pity. Now they offered only admiration. Royal Chancellor Benjamin Whitmore watched with thoughtful satisfaction, resting both hands upon his polished silver cane before quietly speaking to several younger nobles standing nearby. "Remember what you witnessed tonight," he said gently. "Many people spend their lives trying to appear important. Far fewer choose to become worthy of importance. Never mistake one for the other." His words settled deeply into every attentive heart. Near the edge of the ballroom, Ethan remained motionless. He watched Abigail cross the marble floor with the same quiet grace she had always possessed. Nothing about her had changed tonight. She had not suddenly become kinder. She had not suddenly become wiser or stronger. She had always been this remarkable woman. The only difference was that everyone else had finally learned to see what he had failed to value. Beside him, Sophia remained silent. For the first time since entering the royal ball, appearances no longer offered comfort. Expensive gowns, influential families, and admired reputations suddenly felt insignificant beside the quiet strength displayed by the woman she had underestimated. As the final notes of the waltz slowly faded, Adrian and Abigail came to a graceful stop beneath the great silver wolf crest suspended high above the royal dais. Turning toward the assembled guests, the Alpha King spoke one final time. "Let this evening remind every generation that follows," he said with calm conviction, "that titles may be inherited, wealth may be accumulated, and influence may open doors, but honor is earned only through the choices we make when kindness asks something of us and no reward is waiting in return." Warm applause gradually filled the magnificent ballroom, growing stronger until it echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling and spilled into the palace corridors beyond. Abigail looked around the hall one final time and realized the burden she had carried since Ethan walked away no longer remained with her. Betrayal had never defined her future. Compassion had. As cool moonlight poured through the towering palace windows and reflected softly across the silver royal crest resting against her heart, she understood that destiny had never forgotten her. It had simply waited until the perfect moment to reveal that the woman everyone underestimated would leave the royal ball not as someone abandoned by love, but as someone remembered throughout the kingdom because she had never abandoned kindness.